Good morning. This is Stuart Reed from Food Co-op Initiative, and our next presenter was not able to join us in person today, but we did not want to miss the opportunity to share the story of what's happening at Detroit People's Food Co-op. And so I'd like to welcome Malik Yakini, and we will be talking today about how they have used very strong partnerships in their community to get to where they want to be with their co-op. Welcome, Yakini. Malik. Sorry.
Thank, thank you, Reed.
We're off to a good start, aren't we? Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got started? Was the Detroit Black People's Food Alliance there first, or was always the goal to start a food co-op?
Yes, let me correct you and say it's the Detroit Black Community Food Security
Okay.
Network.
Yes. Thank you. Too many acronyms. Yeah.
Very name that's sometimes hard to get right. But yeah, early on in the formation of our organization, we knew that co-ops were important, and so from our founding in 2006, one of our goals was to support existing co-ops and to start a new co-op. And frankly, it's our view. Well, first of all, we're an anti-capitalist organization. We make absolutely no bones about that. We think capitalism is a terrible economic system, both for human beings and for the planet. And then that coupled with this system of white supremacy that tends to concentrate wealth in the hands of people who are identified as white and tends to dispossess black communities and brown communities of wealth. In fact, it extracts the wealth from those communities um, in basically all retail areas, but particularly in the areas of food. So we were very concerned about how we stop that extraction of wealth from our communities, how we build a circular economy within our communities, so that we're lifting up the entire community, and not just a few individuals are making money who maybe happen to be business owners. So we think the cooperative model really is the only way for communities who have been kept out of the mainstream economy to galvanize their collective power within the face of a capitalist system which is hell bent on keeping us out of the mainstream economy. So that was our thinking from the very beginning, and that thinking continues to guide the work that we do. And so we knew from the beginning that co-ops were important. So we started supporting an existing buying club that's operated in Detroit since 1995, and that's a monthly buying club. So we supported them, and we still support them, but we also knew it was important to have a brick and mortar store. And so we started actually a buying club in 2009, which we operated until 2017, which was designed to be a precursor to the brick and mortar building that will soon begin construction on. So it's been really part of our thinking for the last 15 years that our organization has existed.
All right. And how has that, what's the relationship between the two organizations, between the food co-op and the nonprofit?
Mhm. So the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network initiated the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And sometimes Akua Warbright, who's the president of the board of the People's Food Co-op, calls dbcfsn the parent organization. I'm not sure I see it in that way, but certainly we initiated it and have given support to the Detroit People's Food Co-op since it was formed in 2014, since it was incorporated in 2014. In the state of Michigan, where we're operating, Michigan co-op law says that a nonprofit which is creating a co-op can appoint up to a third of the board members to that co-op.
Hmm.
And so the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network appoints 3 members to the 9-person board of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And then that's for the first board term. For the second board term, we appoint 2, and for the third board term, we appoint 1. And then eventually we kind of fall off the board altogether.
Okay.
So our thinking was to make sure that the co-op doesn't go off course, that the values are intact, and the co-op doesn't become co-opted.
Yes.
So we want to be there, even though we don't have a majority vote. We do have some influence, and we want to be there just to kind of help shape things in the formative stages. But once the co-op is fully operational, and is embedded in the value system that guides it, then dbcfsn basically steps back from the direct kind of leadership role that we play in the co-op. So we have been a catalyst and perhaps an incubator for the Detroit People's Food Co-op. We continue to provide office space and office support for the co-op, even though the co-op now is much stronger, has its own board, clearly its own bank account, has volunteers who are working to move the work forward, that has committees, and so we don't have to the parent organization doesn't have to carry the heavy load that we were doing a few years back. The co-op is basically standing on its own now.
Okay. It reminds me a little bit of Mandela Marketplace and the Mandela Food Co-op in Oakland. Was that an inspiration at all?
Yeah, for sure. We visited several co-ops over the last 10 years as we were developing plans to start what became the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And Mandela Co-op in Oakland was certainly one that we visited because they're serving a similar demographic. West Oakland is a majority African American part of the city. It's predominantly low and moderate income, and is a part of the city that doesn't have lots of options for healthy food.
Right.
And so we're very interested in it. And so we visited the Mandela Co-op a few times and talked to some of the key member owners. Also talked to the head of the parent organization that kind of gave them their support. And yes, we were absolutely inspired by that. I guess the major difference between the Detroit People's Food Co-op and the Mandela Co-op is the Mandela Co-op is a worker-owner co-op.
Right.
Our co-op is a consumer co-op, but nonetheless, we have drawn great inspiration from the Mandela Co-op.
Another difference is scale. They're a much smaller co-op than you're planning. And could you tell us a little bit about the combined business plan that you have for the future food co-op?
Sure. So we're actually building a new building. And let me back up and say that our organization, Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, in addition to our opposition to capitalism and our opposition to white supremacy, we are very much embedded in the idea that Black people should exhibit self-determination. That because we live in a society that is largely a racist society and systemically uh, disempowers Black people and keeps us out of kind of the mainstream corridors of power, that what we need to do is we need to be trying to build power and autonomy as much as we can in any project that we develop. And so those ideas guided how we approach the co-op. So we decided early on that we wanted to own the land that the co-op is built on. We want to own the building that the co-op will exist in, so that we're not just tenants in a building owned by somebody else. And so we have this kind of complementary and complicated relationship between three entities. The Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, the 501c3 nonprofit that initiated the co-op, and as I mentioned, appoints 3 of the 9 board members currently. Then we have the Detroit People's Food Co-op itself, the member owner kind of conglomeration where we have 1,274 member owners currently who are interested in bringing this grocery store, this co-op grocery store, to the city of Detroit, and they're actually owners of that business. And then we have Develop Detroit, which is a partner of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. Develop Detroit is a professional development nonprofit. They primarily do housing development, but they have done some commercial development recently. And after meeting with and trying to forge partnerships with 2 other developers, we finally found one whose values are much more aligned with our organization and with our vision for what Detroit might become. And so we found a good partner in Develop Detroit. And so these 3 entities are somewhat tied at the hip, and I'll explain a little bit in more detail the relationship between those 3. So the land that we're building this project on, and we have about 10 parcels that we are purchasing from the city. We currently have a purchase agreement that has been signed and the deposit has been paid, and we're just waiting for that to finish working its way through the city, its way through the city bureaucracy. We already had ownership of two parcels that we bought from an individual owner. And by the way, we got stuck up from those. Part of what's happening in Detroit is because land and houses are relatively cheap compared to the rest of the country. You have lots of speculators from across the country and from around the world who can go online and purchase properties in the city of Detroit. And so there was an absentee landlord living in New York who owned two parcels in the footprint of what will be the parking lot of what we're building. And so we had to pay a tremendous amount of money for those two parcels. One was an empty parcel, and one had a dilapidated house on it. And then we had to pay about $14,000 to have the house demolished. So we have ownership of those two properties and a purchase agreement in for the other 10 or so, and we're expecting that to be finalized in the next 30 to 60 days. So Detroit Black Community Food Security Network will own the land that the project is being built on, to the extent that land can be owned. And let me just say that I personally push back against the concept of private land ownership. It's one of the pillars of the capitalist economic kind of philosophy. This idea that if you have enough money, you can own part of the earth, I really think is a ridiculous idea. But nonetheless, within the context of the current system, this is one of the many contradictions that we hope as we move towards creating a more just economy and a more just society. So, without going into a lot of detail, I'll just say that we looked for several parcels of land before winding up where we are now, which is on Woodward Avenue, Detroit's main street. We were determined to be there. We didn't want to be on a side street somewhere because we're also making a statement. We're building a co-op, changing how we think about economy, but we're also making a statement about who has agency in shaping what is going to happen in the city of Detroit. And so we want to be right in the middle of the mix, highly visible to people coming in and out of Detroit and residents of Detroit each day. So one of the things that we had to do in order to get this property that we're purchasing from the city of Detroit, they didn't just want to see a commercial development on the main corridor. Their plan for what they call the Woodward Corridor includes mixed use development. And so they wanted to see housing as part of this development that we're doing. We therefore had to find a development partner to do the housing part of this. Now, although in a sense the housing and the co-op are all part of the same project, they're being considered separately. So the city requires that there be housing as part of the project, but they're totally different funding sources. They're moving at different paces. You know, they're on different timelines, but still the city is considering them all to be part of the same project. And so that's one of the reasons that we brought Develop Detroit in, so that they could spearhead the housing part that's connected to the co-op project. But the other reason, excuse me, is because this is a $17 million project, which was probably a bit insane also, frankly. And when we started, it started about as a $6 million project. And then as our vision has clarified and as we've, gotten real numbers, this thing has exploded. It's now a $17 million project. And so as we were trying to get all the financing in place, early on, we realized that we had to have somebody with deeper pockets. That the way lending works within a capitalist system is you have to have, if you go to borrow $1 million, you have to have something worth $1 million to serve as collateral in case you default on the loan so the bank can get their money. The bank is not going to lose. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, right.
And so clearly our organization doesn't have, $1 million or $2 million sitting in the bank that we can put in escrow or something to use as collateral for a loan like that. And so we had to find somebody with deeper pockets. And so Develop Detroit has those deeper pockets, and they serve as the guarantor also for the debt financing on the project. And so those are the two roles that Develop Detroit plays. So Develop Detroit and Detroit Black Community Food Security Network formed a joint venture called the Detroit Food Commons LLC. and that joint venture will own the building. That joint venture is spearheading the construction of the building and will own the building jointly. The Detroit People's Food Co-op will be the main tenant and will occupy the entire first floor of that building. On the second floor of the building, we'll have 4 incubator kitchens, 2 larger kitchens and 2 smaller kitchens, incubator or shared use kitchens that will be rented out to food entrepreneurs of various types who need a licensed environment to prepare their foods in. We also, on the second floor of the building, will have a 3,500 square foot community meeting space that can be used for banquets, small conferences, lectures, musical performances, and the like. And then the offices of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network are moving into the second floor of the building also. And so we're playing kind of an interesting role because we are both the co-owners of the building. So in a sense, Detroit Black Community Food Security Network is one of the landlords, but we also are in very close relationship with the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which is a tenant. And so, just trying to think about how to maintain that partnership and still keep appropriate distance when it's needed, is one of the challenges that we're faced with.
Mm-hmm.
Things are going well, and we have a harmonious relationship between
Well, that's good.
3 entities that
Yeah.
are all kind of tied at the hip in this project.
Yeah, that's amazing in and of itself. I know some co-ops struggle even to have a harmonious board of directors. So I think that having a strong partnership where you do have shared vision has probably been very important to keeping this thing moving forward for you. Yeah. So you mentioned a $17 million budget, and I know that's going to shock a lot of people out there. Where I think you may have set a record for the highest dollars, but that isn't all the co-op's budget. That's the whole project. So what's the startup budget for the co-op itself? Do you?
I don't have that in front of me
Okay.
right now. We do have a pro forma that was developed first. Bill Gessner worked with us. May he rest in peace. And in the last year or so, Don Moffitt has been working with us with Colluminate. Both of them are Don Moffitt's with Colluminate. Bill Gessner was
Yeah.
when it was CDS Consulting. But they've been very helpful at us, refining the numbers, looking at the projections per department, looking at the total sales and what have you. So I don't have the entire budget of the co-op with me, but I will say this, that the co-op is basically able to open without being saddled with a tremendous amount of debt, because what we were able to do through this partnership was fold much of what would normally be the debt that the co-op would incur into the financing for the development project. For example, refrigeration is a pretty hefty ticket item for a co-op. And so we're able to fold that into the development financing so the co-op is not saddled with that. As we're moving closer towards beginning construction, we were trying to have it so the co-op had absolutely no debt at all. There may be some small debt, small given the amount of the total project that the co-op has to kick in, but we're really trying to keep that low, very low, to increase the chances of success for the co-op, so the co-op is not saddled with debt from the very beginning and can really focus on getting to the point where the operating expenses of the store are paid by the sales that we make. Right. So the projections are really good. We're expecting to do something like 100, somewhere between $100 and $110,000 per week in sales for the first year.
So a little over 5 million, somewhere between 5 and 6.
Well, clearly you've done these numbers in your head a lot of times. To figure out what 100,000 week times. Yeah, I guess that would be,
Yeah.
So if all goes well, and of course, market studies and pro formas are all projections. They're projections based on, some real data, but they are projections. And
yeah.
So
right.
it's possible, the projections could fall short, or it's possible, as was the case with the Detroit Whole Foods Market, which opened about 6 or 7 years ago, the projections were much higher. In fact, the Detroit Whole Foods Market did in its first year what they had projected to do in the first 4 years.
Wow.
And so, and we think that's part of a trend in folks doing market studies who are not really embedded in Black and brown communities and don't know all of the dynamics. And so sometimes trying to apply a formula that worked in Berkeley, California, or worked in Oakland, or worked in Chicago may not work in the north end of Detroit.
Right.
And so again, the market study and the pro forma could be spot on. They could be a bit low. They could be high. And
Yeah.
so we're of course hoping that the sales come in higher than
Sure.
what our market study projects.
Yeah, I think everybody faces that uncertainty going in. And to put that in perspective, the grocery store part of the project is you've got 17,000 square foot on the first floor, and about 10 of that's going to be retail. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
so about 10,000 square feet of retail space, which makes you one of the larger startups that we've worked with, just for the comparison there.
So. I can say a bit about that. So my experience with co-ops, I'm kind of a child of the 60s and early 70s, which I know you are too. Back rumor has it that you're a former, maybe a continuing hippie holdout. And so my view of co-ops is kind of shaped in that era by in Detroit, the Cass Corridor Food Co-op and the Ypsilanti Co-op and the Ann Arbor People's Food Co-op and what have you. All of these, stores that I visited in the 70s, and basically they were storefronts. They had barrels of whole grains and what have you, and you could get gallons of honey and those kinds of things. And in fact, some people call those co-ops jokingly the crunchy granola co-ops.
Yeah, I've still got a green garbage can from Sears and Roebuck that used to hold rolled oats in the 1970s Seward Co-op. So how's that for history?
Yeah. So, and those co-ops are important, but we live in another era now.
Yeah.
And so my initial vision of it was really shaped by these older co-ops and thinking we would have, kind of a nice little storefront and, you can meet and greet your friends and get some brown rice and, tofu.
Yeah.
But as we really started to dig into this, we realized that the market is much different now than it was then. At one point, co-ops were the only place you could go to get brown rice or, other things that those of us who are trying to be more health conscious might consume. But now you have all kinds of options. The most supermarkets now sell brown, and I'm just using brown rice as an example.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
But, the consumer's awareness has changed, and perhaps to some degree because of co-ops and other kind of alternative aspects of the food movement, people's consciousness has changed, and so there's a much higher demand, and so big box stores are getting into. In fact, as you know, Walmart is the largest seller in the U.S. of organic produce, and so in the face of this changing market, we had to respond to that. So we had to come up with a vision that was much larger than the storefront vision that had defined what I thought a co-op was in the past. And so we have to be much more competitive and has to look like a supermarket that people are used to going into. Has to have some of the flash. I hate to say that, but this is the reality of what we're faced with. The building design has to be inviting to folks, and it has to have a wide product line. Many co-ops.
You have to meet customers' expectations.
You have to meet customers' expectations. So many of the co-ops, for example, the Cass Corridor Food Co-op in Detroit in the 70s, for many years didn't sell meat. Many of the people who started co-ops were vegetarian or vegan, as I'm vegan myself, but that's my personal dietary kind of regimen. But there was a big fight in Cass Corridor Food Co-op when people wanted to start selling meat, and some people actually left the co-op because of that.
Yeah.
Then co-ops who lost members because they wanted to sell beer and wine, and people felt that was veering off the track that they had started on. And so in this time period that we're living in, we have a much broader understanding of the market demands, and so we're not just going to be selling crunchy granola and quinoa from the Andes Mountains or whatever. Although we will sell some of that, and I'll probably buy some of that. Yeah. We also understand that we live in a neighborhood that's predominantly low and moderate income, and the average person is not going to be coming there to get organic quinoa. And so we wanted to make sure that we have a product line that is a mixture of the healthier foods that we really are promoting, but also that we have foods that are accessible. And so our product line is a mixture of what the industry calls natural and organic. About 80% of the product line will be that, and about 20% will be what we're calling clean conventional. So we want folks to be able to come in and get a can of soup. It won't have a lot of preservatives in it, but it also might not be, the finest heirloom tomatoes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, raised organically.
Well, getting back to the impact of your partnerships and during development, how did that impact your ability to open a co-op nearly debt free? Where did your money come from, and how did the various organizations you're working with contribute to that?
I mentioned earlier that I hate capitalism.
Yeah.
It scares me when I start using terms like capital stack, but I'm going to use that term for the benefit of this conversation. So our capital stack consists of money from donors, individual donors, and we got a pretty sizable donation, which came from a professional football player who wants to go unnamed, but it was in excess of $250,000. And then we've gotten several smaller individual donations as well. The second type of money that we've gotten is grants from foundations, and that's the advantage. One of the advantages of having this relationship with the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, because it's able to get the grant funding. And we've gotten significant grant funding from the Kellogg Foundation, from the Kresge Foundation, from the Ford Foundation, from a local foundation in Detroit called the McGregor Foundation. And we're still awaiting, although we have verbal confirmation, we don't have the money in the bank yet, from the Knight Foundation and from the Fisher Foundation. So we were able to convene a meeting of a consortium of local foundations, and we were able to get our friend and program officer at the Kellogg Foundation to kind of host that meeting. And that went all very well. And my thinking is probably that those foundations, which we've been courting for a number of years, were stimulated by the things that were happening in the larger society, both the pandemic and people seeing the fragility of the food system and wanting alternatives to just the grocery stores that people are used to. And so we saw a big increase in membership and also a big increase in the willingness of philanthropy to fund this project. And then the second thing was the murder of George Floyd and the protests that ensued after that. Most foundations began to look at racial justice through a more focused lens. And so our project was perfectly positioned in both regards, both as an alternative to the industrial food system, and also as a project that is rooted in racial equity. And so in the last 8 months or so, we've been able to secure about $5 million in funding from this consortium of local foundations. Some of that funding is PRI money, and that's the other element in the capital stack. So I mentioned individual donations, grants. PRIs, or program-related investments, are essentially low interest loans. In our case, 1% loans that foundations give out. And so in some cases, we're getting a grant and a PRI from certain foundations. And then the last funding is the debt funding. And the debt funding kind of takes on two levels. A large part of it is New Markets tax credits, which is a very complicated federal product. I'm not going to try to go into.
No, please don't.
And then we have some traditional debt funding coming from the CDFI.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's similar to going to the bank and get a loan. So that's how we've been able to piece together. And then the member equity, the $200 that
Sure.
member owners pay, really goes for the store itself. It goes for things like buying the point of sale system and stocking the store initially. So none of the member owner equity goes into the development side of this. We have to make sure that we keep those separate. So they're related.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Lines of demarcation.
Yeah. So $200 is your owner equity investment. Some people would be, I think, might be surprised. We usually often see it lower in especially in communities that have more income scarcity. But you've been able to recruit a significant number of owners at that level, have?
Yeah, so we grapple with how much we should charge for member owner equity, and we looked at many other co-ops throughout the country, and we looked at many co-ops in the state of Michigan to see what they were charging, and we also looked at what our financial need was, and so we tried to put all in a pot, stir it up, and come up with something
Yeah.
that we thought worked for Detroit. So yes, there are some places that charge $100, so we're a bit more, but then there's places that charge more than that also.
Yes.
So we tried to find kind of a mid-level. But in addition to the, let me say there's a couple of options. So some people who are big fish, they just pay the whole $200 in one walk, no
Right.
problem. Other folks who don't have fat pockets, like myself, we had to pay ours in installments. So you can pay $20 and $20 a month until you get to that $200 fee. And then the other thing we have is a scholarship program for residents of the community within a 1 mile radius of the co-op. And so we're partnering with a number of community organizations. We currently have 61 what we call community empowered scholarships that are financed by donations from individuals.
Yeah.
And the way that works is that we're partnering with community organizations in the neighborhood. To each of those organizations will identify 10 people that they'll give this scholarship to. So we don't want to be the ones to deter.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
We want to make sure that power rests within the neighborhood. But the way the scholarship works is instead of paying $200, the resident pays $100, and the other $100 is put in on their behalf.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we maintain the democratic nature of the co-op and that everybody's coming in at the $200 level. It's just in some cases half of that is being put in on somebody else's behalf.
Sure. I like that approach.
Yeah, so it still maintains, a certain level of equity. So those are that's kind of how we're proceeding. We want to make sure that the $200 fee is not a barrier to anyone, and that it is accessible to people who live in that neighborhood.
So one last question on capital. Most co-ops have significant capital campaigns among their membership, their owners, asking for either owners to make loans or invest in preferred shares as a big piece of their capital base. And it sounds like you haven't done that.
We haven't done that yet. And
okay.
One of the challenges we're faced with, and I went to several workshops at the Up and Coming Conference on member owner equity campaigns. And as I listened, I kind of, ran that through the lens of thinking about the community that I live in. And so, I don't want to paint the impression that everyone in Detroit is low income and moderate income, but the vast majority of the population is. There are some people who have expendable income who can support a project like this, but the average person really just doesn't have the capital. And so we are going to do a member owner loan campaign, and we've done some planning for that, and as we're moving closer to starting construction, we are more seriously looking at that to have some of the money for the internal things within the co-op that the co-op is going to have to pay for. But we're doing it again with an awareness of the context that we're operating within. So you'll see that coming sometime in the near future.
All right, great. Well, thank you. This has been fascinating and very informative. I learned a lot about the co-op that I didn't know already, and I really appreciate your time. Anything else you'd like to share?
Did I happen to mention earlier that I hate capitalism and the system?
No, I don't think you did. For those who might have missed that, Malik would like to make sure you understand that.
Make sure you understand that.
Yeah.
That really, for us, this development of a co-op is part of the process of dismantling those systems of oppression and creating a vision of what the future could be. Yes. That is just and equitable for all human beings and for the planet itself. Because if we destroy the planet,
there's not much else to work with.
Not much else to do.
No.
This is all we got.
Well, cooperation is indeed one of the few viable options we have to the economic systems that we're currently enslaved to, I guess, is the best way to put it. And I'm glad to hear your voice in this conversation. So.
Very good to be here.
All right, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference. I know you've got a big role in it, so we'll see you soon. Take care.
Peace.
Peace.